Welcome to Truth, Money, and Freedom, where we discuss everything about truth, money, and freedom with your hosts, Timmy Chonga and Dell, coming to you from our Discord server, also named Truth, Money, and Freedom. In today's show, we'll be discussing alternative architecture with our special guest, Traveling Through Time, who has developed a unique form of architecture that may change the way everyone thinks of building structures and cities in the future. You can follow Traveling Through Time's interests and creations on the YouTube channel, which is also named Traveling Through Time. He also has his own science enthusiast Discord server named Unum, as well as a Twitter account, all of which are linked below in the description. Thank you for joining us tonight, Traveling. Can you give us some of your background?
Yeah, so I am a engineer, and I taught myself CAD a few years ago, computer-aided design, and I've always had a strong interest in mathematics. So I was just kind of looking at the political situation and the real estate situation from like a Austrian lens, which your listeners may be aware of, and I pretty much had the crazy idea of learning structural engineering and seeing what I could do with building vertically to economically alleviate the high cost of rent and land and things of that nature, which is really strangling our economy.
That's really interesting. I'm glad you brought that up as well, because actually, just in line with that, can you state some of the problems that you currently see and issues that are facing cities today as far as architecture, design, and infrastructure go?
Yeah, so the way we build cities really hasn't changed since World War II. And if anything, it's gotten worse, suburban sprawl and things of that nature. And I was really, I wouldn't say inspired, but I was really blown away by several suburban documentaries on suburbia that I saw. And really what I actually see with my own two eyes in my own city, in terms of terrible, terrible land management and the high cost of land and rent, which is associated with poor land management. Also, when land is poorly managed, you get more traffic congestion and higher commutes, and all of these things that really just hurt our quality of life.
Okay, and as far as land management goes, would you say that's more of a city problem or more of a state problem, or perhaps something, even larger concept, a cultural problem?
Well, a lot of this is through local city planning, but it seems to be a cultural problem because you can go to almost any city in the nation and see similar problems arise. There are exceptions, but and I think economically they seem to be doing better because of good land management, but it's still a huge problem on a percentage basis or a market share basis.
Okay, I got you on that. I'll tell you what, I'd love to just dig in right now with fundamentals of your architectural ideas. So basically, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm sure that there's going to be lots of data, that you want to provide here, but how does your architecture deal with the stated issues with, for instance, land management?
So current construction, it is very distant from each other. There's isolated buildings, and the buildings are always one story, or in more urban areas, maybe like 3 to 4 stories. But they're all isolated, and the largest, most important part of my design is the modular system, or I like to call a cellular system because it gives it. You think of like a single-celled organism where it's all like one living unit. And so that essentially it shares walls, ceilings, and floors with other parts of the building. And it also has a three-dimensional transit system that goes throughout the entire structure, which really allows for year-round bicycle use without terrible weather or snow or things like that. And it's kind of like the veins of this organism. And because of the shared walls, ceilings, and floors, it's also extremely high density, which reduces not only traffic congestion, but also commute distances. So with this layered transit system, for example, there could be as many as 10 layers. That means you would take your normal traffic congestion for let's say an avenue, and then you just divide that rate by 10. So despite this very high density, it is actually quite comfortable, and also everything is really within biking distance or even walking distance.
Can I interrupt you for a quick second here? I've got a question for you based on the transit system, which you said basically is interconnected. How do you deal with the noise of the transit system that's interconnected in with the structures that people would call their homes?
So probably the most common form of transportation would be bicycles or even electric scooters. But because of the limited scale of the road system, most vehicles would not be permitted. So the cost of living is significantly reduced because automobiles are not the primary form of transportation, at least within this structure.
Okay,
But
I got you on that. Go ahead.
and one of the main inspirations, or something that kind of opened my eyes a little bit, was is Kowloon Walled City, and it was in Hong Kong in the 80s and 90s. And it looks it's an anarchist state, so to speak, in that there weren't building codes and there wasn't any real oversight from local governments. And what arose was quite disorganized and ugly, and not really a pleasant place to live. But the cellular design of it and the stackable living quarters within this organic kind of blooming city really inspired me and inspired the design. But I just felt that it needed to be tamed, and that was a goal that I set out to do.
Okay, and transit system. I'm sorry, I'm gonna bring that up one more time. You talked about bikes and scooters, that sort of thing. Do you have any other type of transit through the city besides that? For instance, trams or maglevs or anything of that nature?
So there is a mass transit system that we do have conceptually, and the specifics are still under development. But it is, we call it the Hyperloop because it's quite similar to Elon Musk's Hyperloop, except the track length is much shorter and the maximum speed is also much less. But it's like a point-to-point subway system that is high speed, and it doesn't necessarily have to be underground, so hence it's not really a subway.
Understood. So, for instance, you mentioned no cars in the city. Well, if someone had a car, they could park it near the city, right, and take this transit system and get to their car if they needed to drive out of town, for instance.
Oh yes. There's a CGI marketing video that we have available, and right in the beginning of the video, you can see a moderately large parking lot. I think it's like 750 or 1,000 vehicles, and it's underneath the city. It's not underground, but the city is kind of encompassing the parking lot. So the traditional transit systems can not directly interface with the city, but they can be adjacent to the city and very easy to access.
Okay. Speaking of the vertical design structure, how does that solve any problems that we have facing cities today with either land management or any other issues for that matter?
So the thing that a lot of people, well, people who aren't well versed in economics, don't quite understand is the increasing cost of housing is a symptom of not having enough supply of housing. So no matter how far you push up people's incomes with government policy or inflation of things of that nature, if you're not building new housing, then the price of housing will continue to climb and climb and climb, and potentially push out many working class people within the private sector, which causes all kinds of problems for not only the people who are working class, but also politically, psychologically, and it's really because of the necessity of housing as a service and as a product. It causes huge problems throughout all society.
Okay. I'll tell you what, now that we've covered some of the fundamentals of the architecture, do you mind if we cover some of the developmental steps? For instance, concepts such as mathematical concepts and design concepts that you have for the city?
Yeah. So for some reason, we've really switched to we've went away from steel construction, and steel is just such a wonderful, wonderful building material in terms of its strength and its cost. So it just so these structures are designed to be kind of like an industry standard. I call them the USB of skyscrapers. So you can design products or other construction techniques around this existing framework, literally framework, and all of the steel beams of the construction are exposed, and you can attach other beams to them without damaging the structure itself. You can do a wide and shocking array of attachments, so to speak, and really add variety to the city without disrupting existing construction.
With that type of construction, if the steel beams are, for instance, exposed, vertically, are you saying that with this design that it's possible to go ahead and add more to your structures horizontally?
Yes, so they interlock horizontally, and you can build upwards vertically up to around 20 to 25 stories presently. And
That's incredible.
with some increased column strength, you can get that to even 40 or 60 stories. And mind you, this is not a tower. This is like a solid block of structure. So you can have population densities exceeding that of downtown Manhattan, while at the same time having a fraction of the traffic congestion due to the stacked nature of the roads.
That's fascinating. How about a little bit more about, for instance, let's go into a mathematical concept.
Okay, so here's a quick photo of the cost of living reductions. Now, a large portion of the reduction in cost of livings is the land because of the high density. So all of those people are sharing land that would otherwise be used for a road or a front yard or a backyard or parking lot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then because cars are not really used within the city, you would have, say, a car share program similar to bike shares that are popping up in a lot of urban areas. So that would be the reduction in your car cost. And then since the buildings share walls, ceilings, and floors, that results in your reduction in construction costs, and as well as the mass-produced nature of the buildings also reduce construction costs significantly. And then your utility cost has its decreases because the shared walls, ceilings, and floors of the design result in tremendous thermal efficiency gains. So your natural gas requirements to heat your apartment and heat your living space or your business drop by, I believe I calculated it, a factor of 50 is the reduction in natural gas requirements. And then for electricity utilities, 1/3 of all of electricity is lost just from sending the electricity from the generator to your home. And in this design, we would generate our own electricity on site. So there would be that savings there. And then the thermal efficiency savings result in much lower air conditioning costs and requirements, as well as lower outdoor lighting. So the outdoor lighting would be greatly reduced. So that's where the utility cost factors in.
Understood. That's amazing. And for those of you who are just joining us now, we're talking with Traveling Through Time tonight, and basically he's talking about a unique idea he's had with architecture and infrastructure for building cities and structures in the future. And I'd like to bring in my co-host Del now, who's got some live questions from our audience.
Hello there, TC. Thank you very much. Thank you for spending some time with us here tonight, traveling. I've got a couple of questions that's just come our way. I think you may have kind of touched on them both to a small extent, but maybe you can expand on them a little. Valley Girl has come in here. She's kind of got a bunch of questions all in one. She says, is it, once in a stack and pack city, are you trapped? Where's the water supply and where's the food growing? Where would be the food storage and the purchase and the supply chain? And do people own their own homes in the architecture of this city, or is it just rent? I don't know whether you want to answer that one quickly before we move on to the other question.
Absolutely, those are all good questions. So yes, you would own your home outright. We could sell per apartment, or we could sell per cell or per hexagon. So each hexagon is constructed independently from every other hexagon, meaning that you would own that three-dimensional airspace and whatever you decide to put inside of the interior. So the interior is empty; it's a blank slate, and we would have templates available and things of that nature. Or you could just design your own floor plan and business model if it's commercial, or residence if it's residential. As far as food, so the food would be brought in on either train or truck, much of the way it is now, and there would be grocery stores, retail spaces, all of that, things of that nature, both for food and other products. The water would be either well or a man-made lake. So in the marketing video, there is a man-made lake next to the city, and we dig out the lake, and then we build like a hill for leisure right next to the lake. It's kind of cool. And that lake would fill up with groundwater, with rain, things of that nature. And we could just pump as much water as we want out of that lake, put it through a filtration system, and drink it.
Okay, thank you for that. I have another question here from Ingwe. I think you touched on this a little bit, but he asks, do any of these designs potentially reduce or do away with conventional resource or energy use? If so, then in what ways and how?
So the initial form of the city, we were going to generate electricity with diesel, just because diesel generators are fairly cheap and diesel is easy to get. But if you wanted to eliminate diesel entirely, you could have a wind farm nearby, or you could even put a nuclear generator in the basement. And the waste heat from both the diesel and the nuclear generator, either or, would be more than enough heat requirements to heat the entire city in the winter. So we eliminate natural gas entirely in that regard. And then the diesel requirements for the generator would be fairly low from like a per capita basis. And if it was nuclear, we would have zero diesel requirements as well. The cars, the shared cars on site would use, gasoline or diesel. But because almost all of your work and residential and commercial needs could be met within the city, you could potentially get in an automobile maybe once or twice per month and still have a very luxurious lifestyle.
Hey, thank you for those very complete answers there, traveling. If folks have any more questions, then type them in. I'll be sure to pick them up. Back over to you, TC.
Thank you, Del. I have a few questions based on your answers, if you don't mind traveling through time. With Valley Girl's question about basically food, I mean, a basic human need, right? In the city, would people be allowed to have their own gardens? Could they grow their, at least a small garden, have some own foods if they want to?
So because of the high population density and because of the form of construction, greenery, green space, and sunlight would become somewhat more of a commodity. Not too much, but to have like a large garden for food specifically may be frowned upon, unfortunately, because I think that sunlight and that green space is better suited for, say, a park or flowers or things of that nature.
Sure,
But
I do get what you're saying, but you mentioned a lake next to the city. There can be farmland next to the city, can there not?
oh yes, I'm talking about the rooftops
Sure.
specifically.
Yep.
Um,
I knew that part was coming too. I wasn't specific enough with the question, but basically people could go nearby and have gardens if they wanted to.
oh, absolutely. So because of the uh, unique design, um, I was planning on looking to rural spaces for initial development of this design, especially as like a proof of concept and just to maybe get away from all of the noise and congestion and pollution of traditional cities. Because even though this design would be quite compact, it would also be very silent because the cars that are running their engines are driving underneath the city, so you won't. It'll sound like a very quiet forest, on maybe like a gentle morning, and with a few voices in the distance, perhaps.
Understood. Hey, we talked about electricity just a little bit with the possibility of a wind farm, which is as we all know is a very viable way of developing electricity. Even more so than solar is. Is there room for solar? Is that a possibility with your city?
Off-site, definitely. I love the idea of having green rooftops. If you see in the video, there's several, and I personally would like more than that. Just because since each building is connected to each other building, it creates the potential for a seamless flat surface, and you're not trapped like a traditional rooftop with nowhere to go and nothing to do. So you can treat the rooftop as a like lush, vibrant public space for everyone to share and to kind of bring artwork and variation and creativity to.
How about geothermal? Has that been thought of? Geothermal energy?
I think geothermal is great for cooling because the power generation is more than enough excess heat. But for cooling the structure, then yes, geothermal can be a very, very important resource for us to utilize.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I'll tell you what, since we've covered this, um, let's the developments and the concepts are pretty cool behind this. I mean, I don't, even if I say so myself, I find it fascinating. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the politics of for instance, creating such a city. And I'd start with a kind of an off the wall question here, but we're talking about a city here. We certainly have video. We're showing a video of the city. We're showing pictures of a city. Can this be done on a smaller scale? For instance, just building an apartment complex somewhere. Can this be adapted for that and still maintain the cost savings?
Absolutely. So because of the cellular nature, you can build one cell to begin with, and the video that people are seeing, that is 2,200 cells. So if you're talking about initial demand and initial financing, you could start that exact city, start construction of that exact city and that exact design with 1/2200th of the capital and residence requirements that that city would require. So furthermore, as far as politics is concerned, I mentioned briefly earlier that this would probably best be suited for somewhere more rural, because we have you have more freedom and sovereignty over your property than a traditional city. Like they would have all kinds of regulations and hurdles and things of that nature for you to jump through. But for rural property, you could potentially start your own municipality, and then you would have control over property taxes, and really have more of domain over what you would like to develop.
Okay, gotcha. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to pursue politics here in just a minute, but I'd like to bring my co-host back in, Dell, who's got another question live from the audience.
Thank you, TC. Yes, I've got another question here from Valley Girl. She asks, is this plan geared for implementation worldwide? And she's thinking of climate concerns. If you need wind farms, then obviously you need to purchase land for the wind farms. What about solar? Would that be a part of what you were thinking of doing here? And how large would the city population be? And what is the common goal of the residents? Would they, be like-minded? Would there be diversity? And she said, bearing in mind that you can't please everybody, it's very difficult these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So the possible climates for this are actually wider than normal society because of the thermal efficiencies. So it's far more likely to be cool in the summer and warm in the winter than traditional housing. Which, if you think about, a normal residential house, it has very thin walls, and the heat is just kind of sucked away from it. But this is layers upon layers of structure that the cool or the heat would have to dissipate from, and the cool would have to kind of get into. So it's actually better suited for Arctic conditions or even desert conditions. As far as solar is concerned, yes, solar would be great closer to the equator. Solar has a little bit harder time in especially overcast areas. But,
and in northern and southern, extreme northern and southern latitudes, of course.
Right. So near the equator, solar is definitely a great avenue. I estimated the how much electricity you would need per resident, and I think it was like 750 watts, approximately 1,000 watts, which is about 3 solar panels per resident. And that's a rough estimate, but that kind of gets you an idea of how few panels you would actually need. What was the other question? The third part?
The third part was, what about the common goal of the residents? Would they be like-minded, or would it be a diversity situation, bearing in mind the problems that you can't really please everybody all of the time?
Oh, yeah. So I have this goal or vision or whatever of the first one being kind of like a business / creative hub for really open and engaging people that find out about the project mainly from the internet. And it would be a mostly tight-knit community, but if you want to be more of a recluse, that's up to you, of course. And really kind of highlight and move towards I don't know, just making this really organic, vibrant place. Because if you look at the video, there's a lot of gray, and there's 2 reasons for that. The first reason is that I'm only one person with one creative outlook, and it wouldn't be fair for me to try and cover the entire city in art. A, because it would I wouldn't do a very good job, and B, it's exhausting, and things of that nature. So all of that gray is essentially a blank canvas for the residents in the community. And as the structure gets more and more complete, then you have, the next 5, 10, 15 years to really make it your own, not only for yourself, but for your neighbors. So, and the beauty is with the cellular design, you can mix and match all of the hexagons. You can have towers in one place, and you can create different features. So like I had the arena, there's a mall, there's a helipad, and like the Central Park. And so there's all these different features that you can move around and kind of play with even before you start construction, very easily and without changing any of the engineering. So every city will kind of have its own feel based on its community, and it will have its own like artistic style and even local government.
This second question I have here from Ingwe, it's based around the same kind of theme, if you like. And he asks what would be the social implications of having commodity, recreation and living spaces, manufacturing and development facilities all in such close quarters. Could the system potentially result in the kind of social collapse that we see in India and South Korea when it comes to social cohesion due to the high close quarters population?
So the vertical layering of the roads, I think, will do a great deal to not cause the sense of overcrowding and that kind of claustrophobic psychological kind of downfall. And also the close quarters nature of it makes commuting very, very easy and very quick and very reasonable. There's another calculation I did with commute time and commute distance. So the example given is bicycles, and then you can see a density multiplier, which is approximately how much denser it is than your standard suburbia. And if you want to factor in commute distance, you take the square root of that multiplier, and it works out to be 13, which means if you have something that's 1 mile away, you divide by 13, and it's 1/13 of a mile in this new CD. And if it's 5 miles away, you divide by 13, and it would be 1/3 of a mile would be your new commute distance. So you can calculate how long that would take in a bicycle to go across the city or to go halfway across the city. And to travel halfway across the city size of what's shown in the video would only be less than 1.5 minutes on a bicycle to get, and then to go anywhere in the city would be under 3 minutes. So I think because of the vertical layers and because of the complete utilization of the roof space for communal space and greenery, and also the reduced noise, it would be incredibly quiet because of the lack of automobiles. I think the lifestyle and the quality of life will be very, very high despite the amount of people living in such an area.
That would be quite something to travel anywhere in the city in under 3 minutes. Valley Girl has come in with a question whilst you've been answering those two, so I shall take this opportunity and plonk it in here. She asks, how will the city govern itself, and will it have to comply with the regional state law or the federal law? And is the district representation for residents? What about education? And do you have an idea of the ideal population?
So if we created our own municipality, things like building codes and zoning and schooling is all handled by the municipality. So we would have virtually direct control over that. Like the school curriculum may still be handed down to us by the state that we choose to reside in, but we would have a really a surprising a surprising level of autonomy. So as far as the ideal population, as we build into the sky, we create more layers of road. So even if you doubled the height of the skyscrapers, you would double the number of layers of road, meaning that the traffic congestion would actually remain the same. As you build horizontally, however, then your trip across the city would increase, and it could potentially increase congestion if people, have their workplace really far away, relatively speaking. But that's why we looked into developing the mass transit system, which would help further increase the maximum population density. But as far as the steel beams are concerned, like once you get past about 60 stories, you just have to add a lot more steel for every story. It's exponentially increasing. So that means in the example, it's 150,000 people per square mile at about 20 stories. So you triple that, you're at 450,000 people per square mile, which is near the maximum, mathematically speaking. But Manhattan is 70,000. So you're talking about a place that is 6 times denser than Manhattan. And that's near the mathematical limit, honestly.
And once again, I've got another question that's come through while you were answering that one. Ingwe has asked, is there the potential to convert a current metropolitan city into the proposed new design, since its modular nature allows for current implementation, excuse me there, as traditional models get phased out?
So I think it depends on the level of development. If you had a moderately sized plot of land within a city, you could easily develop that unused plot of land into this style, and go upwards as far as you can go upwards, and really alleviate some of the pressure on the local housing market. And this vertical columns of these structures are far enough apart to where they could actually straddle across a 2-lane road. Actually, two 2-lane roads. So if you look in the video, there's a 2-lane road going one direction, and then 2 lanes going the other direction through one cell. And that was initially actually the what determined the size of the cell, is so I could fit 4 lanes through them. And the size is it's good enough for like a retail shop or a restaurant, and a wide range of building utilizations. So that's kind of where the size is derived from. But so it could straddle across existing roads. Worst case scenario, you'd have to maybe move the road over 10 or 20 feet. But you could actually build above and around existing development, as long as as long as the people who live there wouldn't mind getting surrounded by a swarm of skyscrapers, I suppose.
Okay, thank you for your answers, Traveling. If folks have questions, drop them in and I'll be sure to pick them up. Back over to you, TC.
Thank you, Del. If you're just joining us now, we're Truth, Money, and Freedom. We have a server on Discord where we're interviewing our special guest tonight, Traveling Through Time, who has a very unique structural design he's sharing with us tonight for not only cities, but just for individual structures. And we left off with politics, and some of those questions I had for you actually got asked by the live viewers. So thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. Keep them coming. We were talking about the political aspects of building a city, or, you know, for that matter, even apartment complex using your unique architecture. And you talked about creating your own municipality as a possibility, and I find that attractive. Let me ask you, you know, I'm going to hit the third rail here. What about property taxes? Where does that fit in?
So because we ideally would have our own municipality, we could also fund that municipality through additional taxes on all of your utility costs and completely eliminate property tax altogether. So,
so what you're saying basically is someone could actually own a home in the city in the United States of America per se, and then not have to pay property taxes?
Oh yeah, outright. And potentially we could fund the entire municipality with like a 25 or 30% tax on your already extremely low utilities.
Wow, that's amazing. It sounds a bit libertarian, you know, in its mindset. Was that the original intention?
Oh yeah. So I am a fan of the Venus Project, and I guess that kind of inspired these grandiose ideas somewhat. But the whole communist kind of bent with the Venus Project, it's so limiting for the residents psychologically, and I really admire the organic individualism that arises within cities in terms of the architecture and the colors and the businesses and the activity and the relationships and all of these things. And that's why it's really important that the city continues to grow and continues to develop and continues to mature well after, you know, the first people move in, or the first keys are handed out, so to speak. The whole concept of building a centrally planned city that is completely finished on day one is really it feels like there's nothing to aspire to, and there's nothing for the residents to dream up and to make their own, and it's just very depressing to me. So it was really important that that each cell has full interior autonomy, and they also have control over exterior ornamentation and all kinds of stuff, you know, within reason, as long as the community kind of agrees to it. As with the exterior, the interior is yours; it's your space, it's your domain. But the exterior, you know, you just run it by our local libertarian municipality, and chances are we'll rubber stamp it if it's beautiful and a lot of fun.
That sounds very interesting indeed. Let me touch upon one more thing we talked about here with some of the questions that were coming in. The city design versatility. Basically, you're not saying that you can create a city that's a giant bedroom community where everyone works someplace else and they have to leave the city to go work. You could actually build a city with the idea of some kind of work infrastructure in mind. For instance, you know, some kind of plant where people go to work, or something of that nature. But how would you deal with the pollution involved with actually having, for instance, some kind of factory next to the city?
So because of the proximity, industrial businesses would have to maintain a certain level of cleanliness for their waste product, as well as, and especially, like smokestacks and odors and things of that nature, just because people are going to be outdoors, you know, soaking up the sun, potentially 100 yards from these facilities. So we would have to only allow companies whose product doesn't require, you know, large chemical facilities, or you know, there's not going to be an oil refinery in your backyard is kind of what I'm saying.
Okay,
But
gotcha. So it'll be whatever it is, it has to be environmentally friendly, for instance, basically to comply with the original idea, the concept.
oh yeah, so environmentalism is a very big part of this whole thing. And if someone goes up to the rooftop to go to a park and lounge in the sun, they don't want soot blocking the sun and smelling like sulfur or paint or some other
Right.
like chemical.
Because we all love the smell of sulfur, don't we?
Right. And fireworks aren't too bad.
Well, how many jobs do you think building a standard city like you're envisioning, how many jobs do you think that would create?
So we've done very rough calculations on the construction time. We'll have a much better idea once we get 1 or 2 cells done. But we estimate that it would take 4,500 laborers approximately 1 year to build the entire example city within the video. And that, you might say 1 year, like that's an incredibly short amount of time. But the repetitive nature of the construction drastically increases construction time and drastically reduces labor costs and labor time. So you could imagine a team of 10 guys. They could be trained on how to build these cellular structures in a matter of weeks or even days. And then they'd be mostly autonomous. And you just tell them, okay, we need, 3 here and 4 over here. And, oh, here's all of your materials being unloaded off of freight trains. And, just help yourself, take what you need. And it would be a very fast and very surprisingly quick construction process.
Understood. Well, 4,500 jobs in 1 year. Wow, that is incredible. How many people would live in that city again?
So the example is approximately 50,000, and that does not include the commercial and industrial properties, which would also be employing people. So the 4,500 number is construction jobs, and the permanent jobs that could result from the city. Well, if you have 50% of the people in gainful employment, that's an additional 25,000.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, that sounds great. Can actually, I was going to ask you about some of the psychology of this. Um, do you mind if we discuss the possible psychological effects of these changes? Not only, basically because of the architecture itself, but the ideas behind. For instance, I mean, you're talking about a libertarian government, the possibility of no property taxes. So I was just wondering if we could talk about the psychology of it.
Absolutely. So we kind of live in this like atomized culture. Some people have used that buzzword, and I completely agree. When you're when you're on the highway or when you're sitting at a red light, and you just feel like in that little metal box, and like, I mean, you go to like a bar and everyone just kind of seems like they're in their little bubble, right? A lot of that would be reduced, just because you make more eye contact with people when you go outside to the park. We've calculated how busy the parks will be on an average day, and they're not too bad. But chances are you won't be the only person there, because the human mind kind of has this innate desire to see blue sky and green leaves. So that will definitely be a destination for a lot of people. But it would really be a organic sense of community, and ideally people would get more involved with like local events and local businesses, and the reduced cost of living and the kind of like quiet environmentalist focus, as well as the focus on leisure, I think would really result in a positive and engaged community.
How about the psychology of, for instance, those who might be used to more of a suburban setting, actually being in these structures, which we're seeing, which are hexagon in shape, stacked on top of one another. Basically, would you, be worried about your neighbor playing, his radio too loud or anything like that? I mean, the psychology of, for instance, moving from a setting where houses are separated by, in some cases, dozens of feet apart, and then actually just kind of living on top of each other and right next to each other. Would people be bumping into each other all the time in the halls? That.
So we've calculated the estimated traffic density of these roads or corridors, I suppose, and it worked out to be approximately one person every 12 seconds would be your average traffic density. So the vertical layering really helps alleviate the feeling of like crowding. Furthermore, for noise pollution, the bricks that make up the city are AAC block. It's a special type of brick that was patented in 1920, and it's 80% air. It's kind of like foamed concrete, if you've seen videos of foamed concrete. Anyway, these blocks have 5 times the insulative value of normal brick, and 10 times the sound insulation of normal brick. So
understood. So basically, there wouldn't be so much of a concern necessarily with sound, particularly coming from outside.
Oh yeah. I mean, there could be a concert next to you going on, and you'd probably hear it muffled, but it wouldn't be nearly as intrusive as your typical residential construction.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, due to time constraints, I'm forced to kind of wrap it up pretty quick here, but I wanted to, first of all, before we go to additional topics or final thoughts, I would like to thank everyone who's been listening tonight. We are Truth, Money, and Freedom. We have a server on Discord. The link is below this video. Anyone's invited. You can come in and type with us, chat with us on the voice chat. Basically, tonight we're talking with Traveling Through Time with his unique architectural ideas, which he's shown videos and slides to us tonight for. And I'd like to ask you if you have I've mentioned earlier that you have your own Discord server named Unum, and you have a Twitter account, and you also have a YouTube, and of course those are all linked down below. Is there any other way people can get a hold of you if they'd like to talk to you about your ideas?
Email is good. That works.
Okay, what is your email address? We'll link it down below if you like, but you go ahead and say it if you like.
It's hexy.nut@mail.ru.
Gotcha. And basically, your Discord server named Unum, I'm assuming people can join there as well if they'd like to talk to you directly?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, and also I know that you do tend to hang out with Truth, Money, and Freedom as well. So if he's not in Unum, you guys can look for him right in Truth, Money, and Freedom, right in our server. I'd like to thank you once again for taking the time to explain this wonderful architectural idea and actually walk us through it. And if you have any final thoughts, or if there's anything else you think we might want to talk about.
No, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to get this information out there. I feel that society is at a real pivotal time in history right now. What with the internet and suburbia and Keynesian economics and things like that, kind of really struggling, and more and more people are seeing the faults of our trajectory, and I'm just offering a more efficient and environmental alternative.
Yeah, not just that, but also, we discussed this here in this interview. It can be scaled down, correct? If someone wants to build a home this way or an apartment complex this way, that option exists as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The smallest one we have is 20,000 square feet, but it could be reduced even further with just some math.
Gotcha. Well, thank you once again for joining us tonight. Again, we're Truth, Money, and Freedom, where we discuss everything about truth, money, and freedom. And we thank our guest, Traveling Through Time, for joining us tonight. We hope you all have a pleasant day.